This is the Overton Pod. Hello, Kanthan.
How's it, John? Good to see you again.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
Likewise. Not that long.
You've been stuck in these traffic jams and not making your way across to me.
They decided that midday is a good time to cut the grass on the side of the highway and close down an entire lane.
It's pretty much unreal, but it all ties in with our labor laws in this country. Because in the rest of the world, they do that kind of stuff at night.
Yes, that would make sense.
And they put up floodlights, and
yes,
there's no
and there's no one on the road.
Yeah, and there's no one to actually mess with.
Yes,
but that would actually mean paying people double time at night, and what's more
and
likely,
having common sense as well.
But the lights would get stolen.
Well, they'd have to have generators as well, which have probably already been gone. You said to me before we started that there's not much to talk about, so. We don't know what we're really going to get into. Thanks. Just checking. There's tons to talk about. Maybe let's start with Jeffrey Epstein. Because we haven't gotten into it on the show, mainly from my perspective, because there's nothing to get into. Now, everyone's going to accuse me of defending a pedophile or something to that effect, but this is where I stand on the matter. Firstly, I was interested in this story in 2018 before most people knew it even existed. So you'll forgive me if I don't really care if when CNN told you to be interested in the story last year, you suddenly became very, very focused on it because they thought Donald Trump must be in the inverted commas files. And so we'll finally get him. He's been investigated by the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, and every other intelligence agency on earth. We never managed to get him in any other way through any of those things, but definitely now, the things that Biden sat on for 4 years, he's in there. He's in there for sure. And of course he wasn't. But really, there were no files. And this is what people never understood. What happened with Epstein is that this is a bad guy, but clearly, based on what's been released, a very smart guy. A guy who funded a lot of Bitcoin, by the way. The start point of Bitcoin looks like Jeffrey Epstein funded a lot of that research and development that went into that. So the whole notion of, how did this guy who was a teacher become this rich man? He must be a CIA asset. No, just a really, really smart guy. Looks very charismatic as well, which is how he had these relationships with all these famous people. And so he became very wealthy in what was the initial sort of VC boom in the early 90s. And then with wealth comes power, and also comes being able to mingle in the right kind of crowds. And very clear that he was obviously this sort of charismatic, wealthy, relatively generous with his time and his things guy. Now, yes, some of those things that he was generous in seemed to be dodgy, but he was generous with inviting people to his holiday home. We now know that bad things went on that holiday home, but I'm going to get into what we actually know and what we think we know, and this is my problem with the files. Now, the whole concept of the files, that was an internet theory. In fact, the list, have you noticed how the list has disappeared? No one talks about the list anymore. The Epstein list. It was meant to be a list of people's names, and these were the people he was, because he's a CIA asset who was also from Mossad, he was now keeping this list of people who he had this compromat on because he had video footage and photographic evidence of them doing illegal things with underage girls. And he had created this list, and the whole world was being controlled by Jeffrey Epstein. Well, it turns out there was no list because that was an internet meme, and it was always an internet meme. That's where it came from. And then it made it into the mainstream. Everyone talked about a list, and now there's no list. And then they were talked about the files. And it turns out when you've got a lot of documents on a guy that you're investigating, let's say you're the FBI, and you investigate someone, you create paperwork. Turns out you need to put the paperwork into something. Turns out generally you put paperwork into files. So yes, there's Epstein files, but there's not Epstein files in the way people wanted to promote it as, here's a file of the time Epstein took this girl to this island, and then the following royalty and celebrities followed and they all did bad things, and so we're going to take that file and now people are going down. What's actually happened is what Donald Trump said would happen, which is a whole bunch of information would be released, which would be embarrassing to a lot of people, but ultimately is not criminal in its behavior. There's some innuendo, certainly. There's some circumstantial evidence. But as I pointed out to someone the other day, there's nothing that's come out, and there's not going to be anything that comes out that is going to be enough for a prosecutor to take a case forward. Because unfortunately, the law doesn't work on gossip. It doesn't work on your WhatsApp group. It doesn't work on your memes. It works on evidence. And so, for example, even though there's a photograph with Prince Andrew, as far as I understand, and that photograph shows Prince Andrew with a younger woman, it's unclear how old the woman is. To my knowledge, we have no testimony from that woman, or she signed an NDA, which she'd have to break now and give all the money back. None of the people who did that, by the way, are willing to do so. And so there's just no evidence, right? There's no evidence. A photograph of a clothed man and a clothed woman is not actual evidence of a crime. And so that's my opinion on the Epstein files. I think that he was obviously a bad guy. We know that from a plea deal he made in 2008, I think it was, where he had to kind of plead and got a very much a sweetheart deal from the state, but he pleaded essentially to a number of crimes, but what boils down to inappropriate sexual behavior with minors. I think in that case it was girls 15 or thereabouts. And so we know he's a scumbag. We know he's a bad guy. And certainly people who were having relationships with him post that, where there was an actual conviction, you can question their morality. People certainly have. Someone like Peter Attia is in big trouble over it because he was consulting to the guy as a doctor, essentially, towards the end of his life, 2017, 18, I think it was. But there's not much more there. And I really hope that now we can move on from this because it's been an annoyance, frankly. You know, you will talk about whatever it happens to be, whatever topic, and inevitably some moron will want to bring it back to the Epstein files. Oh, well, let's talk about what's going on in Iran. Well, you know, Epstein this and Epstein that. No, guys. Let's leave it now. He was a scumbag with a lot of friends in high places. They sent lots of emails to each other. Some of the emails are a bit embarrassing. Yeah, we all probably believe that bad stuff happened on that island. We don't have any good proof or evidence of that. And we're going to have to move on. He's dead now. It's unfortunate that we don't have more so we can put other people behind bars who did bad things. I would hope that we can find more evidence if it exists, but I don't think it does. And it's time to move on. Right. Your take.
Well, that was long and fairly comprehensive. You might remember some months ago when we were talking about Trump's visit to the UK and the fact that there was the unprecedented matter of Trump being the only president to have 2 state visits to the UK. And I said at the time that the purpose of that visit, from Trump's perspective, was to have a one-on-one with Charles and say to Charles, best you take some action at this point about your brother, because these things are going to be released and they're going to be embarrassing to you. Not that there's going to be criminality coming out of it, but it's going to be embarrassing and you need to be taking action about it. And Trump, for the longest time, insisted that, you know, everything that needed to be released has been released because of the fact that he was aware there wasn't the ability to convict anyone on what was left. So you will have embarrassing stuff coming out, like the fact that, Bill Gates ended up wanting to get antibiotics smuggled across to his wife.
After having slept with what sounds like Russian hookers.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yes. And
again, no crime committed.
No crime committed, but it
shows Bill Gates to be an arsehole as well.
But we knew that all along.
Sure. We
Right.
don't. Well, we should have.
Yes, and certainly in everything that he's been doing ever since he left Microsoft and started dabbling in messing up with everyone's healthcare and messing up with everyone's diet and genetically engineering mosquitoes, and the guy is
meat.
Yes, so
Meat-free meat.
all of this stuff, but I mean, what you have is embarrassing stuff that comes out about people who were in correspondence with Epstein. But, probably by the same token, if you go through your emails and my emails,
Well, this is exactly.
you will find that, we
But
have...
levels, right? So
Yes,
levels.
yeah, there are
You're not
levels.
going to find embarrassment like what Bill Gates is being embarrassed on in my
No.
emails. Okay. But certainly, and I think, the comment was made in a WhatsApp group, actually. Someone was going on about how terrible Epstein is. And I kind of said to the group, I agree. I don't have any defense of the man. He's essentially a rapist. But I said, it's a group of boys. And I said to the group, if anyone got hold of the log of this chat that we have, and usually it's just a guy's chat, silly guy chats, as happens, and you'll know what that kind of sounds like sometimes. It's not all the time like that, but there's several points in chats like that amongst men where if someone got hold of that, it would either be very embarrassing, or the kind of stuff that in some cases might end people's careers.
Yes.
Because obviously once you remove context from something and banter, it's the same as that tape they tried to end Trump with the first time about grabbing women. That was what that was. He said it's locker room talk. Every man understood what that means. But unfortunately, some tried to play coy, and obviously women don't generally talk like that. And don't joke about like that, and so that was an attempt to try and sink him, and that's happened to many people.
So to that point, you see now that the Clintons have decided that they're going to testify before Congress.
Have they reversed their decision because they previously said they wouldn't?
Yes, and now that they are saying that they would, and Trump has come out and saying, it's a sad thing that they need to do this because he'd prefer that they don't.
Yeah.
And what that's telling me is that Trump is very clear that if there was anything where he was able to go after the Clintons based on what was on those files, then he would be doing it. But given that there isn't anything there, the idea of establishing a precedent of putting a former president before Congress to testify on matters of an inherently personal nature, I think, again, undermines the dignity of the office. So whatever you may say about
Bill Clinton.
Trump, about Trump.
Oh.
He's not in any way undermined the dignity of the office of the president. He certainly has
Well, a lot of people would disagree with you on that.
he has scathing things to say about his predecessor and about Obama. But there are things about those two individuals and not about the office of the president itself.
I think as a side point, since you brought that specific issue up, it's interesting the things that given that he has access to all the intelligence, right?
Yes.
The President of the United States has all the intelligence the United States has, and obviously a lot of it is classified.
Now that he has an FBI director that reports to him, yes.
Yes.
Now that he has
and
a
DNI that reports him. So he has access to all of the intelligence.
But that wasn't the case in Trump 1.0.
Sure, but he could say, look, what is the actual data here? What's interesting to me is what he harps on and what he drops. So in other words, on the Epstein stuff with the Clintons, he goes, I don't think it's necessary that they should be testifying. There's nothing there. When we all know that he knows everything that's actually there.
Sure.
But
what's interesting,
on the 2020 election, he won't let it go.
Yes.
Given that he also knows everything that's there. That he won't let go. To me, that's
now
interesting.
the trail of evidence with regard to the rigging of the 2020 election, more and more evidence pops up, pretty much on a daily basis. The question of, what one can end up doing with it is something entirely different, which is probably the reason why he himself doesn't make that much of a song and dance about it, because, you can't really overturn an election from...
There's nothing you can do.
You can't. Yeah,
it's going to be. If they manage to prove And perhaps interesting segue into this topic because about a week and a half ago, they raided the Fulton County offices where the sort of voting offices where all the ballots are kept and all the planning gets done.
They found that Biden votes were scanned multiple times.
Yeah. The videos are fascinating in terms of what happened. There were essentially repeat ballots that were clearly photocopies, essentially, where they were marked as different ballots. But there are markings, like ink markings and things, which are unique to one ballot, but then are copied across 40 ballots, and they all vote for Joe Biden. Even in cases where they voted for the Republican for other things, but then Joe Biden is the president vote. So, there is a lot of stuff coming out about that, and they're clearly compiling a case. What will happen with that is quite interesting in the sense that I imagine it's going to end up at the Supreme Court to decide, okay, if we had an election that was not legitimate and we essentially appointed the wrong person in that position, then inaugurated that person, then what of what he did counts. Now, you can't take away things that happened in the moment, military movements, for example. But
certainly all of the pardons that he signed.
The pardons he signed, the laws he signed into even if Congress had passed something, the president still has to sign off.
Yes.
So those things that he signed off, whether that is reversed and what that means, it could create quite a bureaucratic mess, actually. But as I've always said, elections are contemporaneous. And so, once an election has been declared for about 48 hours, roughly, and even if the person declared as the winner is not in fact the winner, history shows that stands.
Yes.
Even when people know it wasn't real. Venezuela, Maduro is a good example.
Robert
Mugabe is a great example. He did it a couple of times. I think that's...
Well, 2002 was the one that he definitively lost. And the entire reason why that ended up being the fiasco that it was because Morgan Tsvangirai was fundamentally a weak person. And instead of standing up proudly, declaring himself the winner and inviting the armed forces to support him and to assure them that he would be on their side to ensure that their position in society was not messed with, he instead appealed to the international community saying, I won, but they're not letting me be president.
Boo-hoo.
Yes.
Boo-hoo. Please, please, EU, won't you help me? And then, surprisingly, the EU was completely useless. Shocking, I know. All right, so let's leave the Americans alone for a bit.
Well, just to the point about the Americans, the SAVE Act, which is the Voter Registration Act.
Mm-hmm. Because America's the one of the only countries that has mail-in ballots, and America is the only country where you can vote without an ID in many of the districts there. So
now Congress is trying to pass this act, which is probably going to be the first filibuster that we've seen in a long time, because the way in which the Senate works on these things is that if you don't have 60 votes in the chamber, 60% of the votes in the chamber, then, but it has been submitted by a majority of senators, there's this thing called a filibuster where a person who doesn't want it to pass just basically stands up and continues speaking to the bill and continues speaking with the sole view of delaying a vote on the bill. And filibusters can go on for days.
Yes.
And it's a question of seeing how many of the Democrat senators have the stamina to be able to do this over the next period, particularly because the overwhelming majority of Americans approve of requiring ID in order to vote.
Completely logical. I think it's something like 75% of Dems and north of 80% of Republicans.
Yep. So
think you should have an ID to vote.
So
completely logical. Let's be honest. We're in South Africa, and if I said to you, "Look, you can vote at the voting station. We have elections this year, local government elections. You can vote at the voting station, or the Postal Service will deliver a ballot to your house, and then you will send it back with them, and we're gonna run it that way as well. I mean, everyone obviously laughs at that, and even if the Postal Service operated properly, it still would be illogical. Because if you just think about how people move houses and the fact that those details aren't kept up, and the fact that if people got a ballot, they might just fill it in for someone else. And then the idea of not taking your ID book to the voting station. I mean, we just know in South Africa.
In California, they in fact instruct the electoral officers to not ask for ID.
Yes, it's against the law in California. So in other words, if they do ask you for ID, they can actually be charged with a crime. So, yeah, quite fascinating, and will be a game changer if they manage to pass that act.
So to, my point around the earlier conversation apropos of Epstein, Trump actually picks fights that he's likely to win, and he puts everything else on the back burner. And I think that in the case of the stolen election, Trump is very clear that voter ID is a fundamental thing that needs to be gotten through. He's put huge pressure on all of the Republicans to get these voter ID laws passed before the midterm elections, which, frankly, is going to make or break Trump's administration. I think that if in the event of these voter ID laws not being passed, the Democrats are going to continue rigging elections as they've done in the past. And, certainly just in terms of the fact that California in of itself, something like 9 electoral votes would have gone to Trump based on the fact that the voter numbers have been rigged. And again, this ties in with the way in which voting districts are allocated. It's allocated on the number of residents, not on the number of citizens. So when you flood an area with illegal immigrants, it entitles you to a higher number of voting districts, even though you don't have a higher number of voters.
Yeah. All right, so let's bring it home. We can get back to the States if necessary a bit later. But elections at home because, well, there's a lot going on. John Steenhuisen is stepping down from the leadership race. I need to get this right. So he's still the leader of the party. I don't know if you've read something else.
He's basically the Tim Walz of South Africa.
Okay, why do you want to make that comparison?
Because Tim Walz is stepping down from running for governor of Minnesota again. So he's still governor, but he's stepping down from the race, and he's going to allow other people to step up and stand for election. Hence my saying that he's the Tim Walz.
Yeah. So the DA is going to have a Congress this year, as far as I understand. I think it is this year, 26. And they're going to vote for a new leader. So there's going to be a leadership race. And so take your bets on who's going to be the leader. We'll get to it. But he's stepping down. I want to talk about why he's stepping down and a bit of the reaction to him stepping down. So I think you and I both called this last year.
Yes. When he was stupid enough to fire Roman Kabanak.
Yes. We both felt that his behavior there was the start of something.
But it showed that he was singularly lacking in testicular fortitude to start off with.
Correct.
Intelligence as well.
Yes.
I think it's pretty clear to everyone out there that Roman is a good friend of ours.
And a bit of acumen as well.
Yes. But, given that, yes, Roman is a good friend of ours, but the fact is that the guy is flippant smart. He knows agriculture like the back of his hand. And this entire fiasco around foot and mouth disease would not have happened. And all Steenhuisen needed to do at the point at which he appointed Roman was to just sit back, let the dogs bark, allow Roman to do his job, and now we would have had a situation where everyone would have been singing Steenhuisen's praises because Roman very clearly would have ensured that the foot and mouth outbreak would have been very firmly stomped on before it had a chance to become as widespread as it is right now.
I think it's important because, as you point out, we have a bias there. But I think it's important to point out how that would have happened, because it's not simply that, Ramon has some great ability or better knowledge than any other person or anything like that. No. It's best understood from knowing how John has messed this up. And what he's done is he has basically tried to centrally dictate to farmers how to manage this outbreak while limiting the private sector from being involved in treating these animals and ensuring that the outbreak is stopped. So in other words, he said, I'm the government, I know better. And as Ronald Reagan said, the 9 most terrifying words in the English language, or the most...
I'm from the government and I'm here to help you.
Yes. So that's really what John has done. Now, I know that Ramon's approach was completely different. It was to secure vaccines privately. This was already last year, long before there was really a bad outbreak. It was just stopped bubbling up. It was to allow the private sector to work with government. It was also to involve policing. So at the moment, animal movement just happens willy-nilly because John hasn't given the instruction to the security cluster as the minister to ensure that there is restricted animal movement where there needs to be. And so nothing's happening in that regard. And I think it just needs to be understood that John has shown himself to be wholly incompetent in this role. And I've been thinking quite a lot about why that is. Because...
Well, he's never run a business in his life.
Yeah.
And it really that cuts to the chase. When your only job your entire life has been being a politician, and you don't actually understand, logistics, you don't understand forward planning. It's very simple things of, the difference between an income statement and a balance sheet, which are all things that, Ramon knows very well.
Asset an expense.
Yes. And the difference between buying takeaways with your credit card and with the company's credit card.
So, I don't like credentialism because I think that it had a real place in the world 100 years ago.
I don't think about credentialism on the basis of someone having a degree from a university.
Sure.
However, it's a very different situation if you've run a business, you've actually been involved in agriculture, you have a track record.
I think even track record today doesn't necessarily apply. So let's go 80 years ago. If you were a captain in the Air Force 80 years ago, I think you could be pretty relied upon that you knew what you were doing around aircraft, around deployment of those aircraft, about crewing, about resources, about fueling, around weapon systems, etc. I think that could be relied upon. I think that if you had a PhD in something 80 years ago, probably even 60 years ago, I think that probably meant you were an expert in that field, that you knew more than almost anyone else in that field. I think that's what that meant. And so I think those credentials mattered and they were important back then. And so when you look at something like the Manhattan Project and you had that level of incredible physicists and smart people that did have those degrees working on those projects, it mattered. You needed those people. Unfortunately, what's happened over time, as we know, is that there's been this dilution of education. And so now you can get a PhD in almost anything. If you want to do a PhD, you can. There's no sort of, you're not smart enough, or we think you've reached your level, or if you want to go do a PhD, it's just about time. Invest the time, throw the money at the university, and I promise you can get it. You too can get a PhD. And that's not to take anything away from those people. Someone is going to get very defensive because they worked really hard on their PhD. It's not to say you didn't, but you must understand that when everyone can, and when the requirement to get that thing doesn't require any great contribution to society, there's a lot of dilution about what that means. And, you know,
So can we agree that a PhD in engineering still counts for something, unlike a PhD in gender studies?
yes, it likely does, but I think it probably counts for a little bit less, unfortunately.
Well, a little bit less than
it used to.
Than it did 80 years ago.
Absolutely.
I'll go with that. But, but I think the barriers to entry for getting a PhD in engineering are far more substantial than getting a PhD.
They are higher because you probably need to be an engineer, right?
Yes.
And so just as a start. So how do I bring this to John? John was criticized heavily, and for a very long time it was the main point of attack on him to say he's only got a matric. And I always found that to be rather unfair, because I know people who have higher degrees.
So Mark Zuckerberg technically only has
a matric, yes, a high school diploma.
Yes.
But I know people, but in fairness, Mark Zuckerberg did get accepted to Harvard and did go there. He just decided to drop out.
Sure.
John didn't. Mm-hmm. So the argument was, look,
Steve Jobs, similar situation.
He only has a matric. He never got into university / went. He said he started a degree later on, but stopped. It doesn't matter. It was a point of attack. This guy's only got a matric certificate. And I always thought that was rather unfair, because I know people who just have matric certificates. You've pointed out to some very famous ones, but I know just normal people who didn't have great matrics and didn't get accepted to universities, and might not have if either didn't apply or whatever it is. But they've done exceptionally well in their lives, and they're very successful. And many of them more successful than people who've gone and got higher education and very good degrees and great careers. And so I didn't think that was fair. But I think that John has hit a brick wall in being the Minister of Agriculture. And unfortunately, it's a combination of that lack of education together with what you're talking about. Because people who don't have an education go into the real world and they get an education. So you only have a matric and you decide you're really, really interested in the restaurant business and you want to own a restaurant one day. So you go and you become a waiter, or a cook, or the cleaner, or something. And there are examples of this, plenty. You can find them dime a dozen. And you slowly work your way up, and suddenly you're the assistant manager.
My grandfather left school age 17, apprenticed himself to a printer, learnt everything to go with the trade, and 23 years old, opened his own printing press.
Yes, but he spent several years learning the business,
exactly,
and knowing what an expense, what income expense was, an asset, etc. You know, these sort of things, and so this is what John's lacking: real world experience. And here's my worry. So John has now hit a situation which he couldn't deal with because he doesn't have that real life experience, and unfortunately, the experts, inverted commas, that he has surrounded himself with are no better. And this is what I'm really worried about. I look at the DA, we're talking about leadership and the people who are going to take over, and they have the same problem. Some of them are educated. Jordan Hill-Lewis is an economist. But their work experience, their ability to build things, is either non-existent or unproven. These are people who have essentially decided, I'm going to be a politician. And we all have to be kind of questioning, because I was thinking about this quite deeply. You look at someone like Andrew Jackson. I think it's Andrew Jackson, is the president of the United States. I did get that right. Eh? I knew it was Jackson. I couldn't remember that Andrew. You know, this is a guy who became a soldier at like a 11-year-old, 12-year-old or something like that, went and fought wars, came back, studied and became a lawyer, ran his own businesses, ran cattle, he had this full life of doing all these other things and being involved in all these other things, and then became a politician. And that used to be the way.
Well, the founding fathers of the U.S., they were pretty much all cut from that cloth.
Yes.
And they served their time in politics And then they went back to doing their jobs.
Yes. But for hundreds of years, this was the case. So smart, accomplished people in the society got to a point where they had achieved what they wanted to with their businesses, their careers, proven themselves as well to other people to have provided value.
Well, you see, Trump has now been surrounding himself with people who are cut from that cloth. So take Scott Bessent as an example. Howard Lutnick is another example. David Sachs, another example. They're all people who became highly successful, put aside their business interests to step into government to fix things for a fixed term. And so effectively taking a cut in pay, every single one of them. And at the end of their term, they're going to step back into the real world and carry on what they're doing. None of them are career politicians. They've come in just to solve particular problems. Now, to translate that to what went down in terms of Steenhuisen, all he had to do was to sit down with the likes of Sakaliga and actually say, what is the most efficient way that we can get to the bottom of this problem? And because we actually recognize that our cattle stocks are now being depleted because of this outbreak, let's put aside all of the export-related stuff, which is something else that we need to get to. But what is the basic thing that we can do to solve this problem? But again, it went back to his early days where he had not had a meeting with the chicken farmers. You might remember this.
Yeah.
And the poultry industry was trying to get a meeting with the guy, just to have him come and talk with them, and so that they can get a sense, he can get a sense of what needs to happen, because poultry is the single biggest source of protein for the masses of this country. Mm-hmm. And that in of itself should be enough of a reason for him to say, I need to take this seriously.
I think he had a trip to Germany that week or something.
Yeah.
Or somewhere in the world,
but,
multiple trips.
It's a fundamental inability to recognize that you need to be shoring up the stuff that actually keeps this country afloat.
I think, look, a deep criticism, if you look into that department, has been that John's focus seems to have been very much on exports. Okay, so he has done some good stuff with regards to exporting product. The issue is that he seemed to have completely neglected the internal functionings. So if you were to choose, you come into that post and you've got to choose between focusing on the internal goings on of agriculture or the external, sending produce overseas. You obviously want to focus more on the internal, right? You want to make sure you can produce enough food to feed your own population.
But take the view at the same time that the internal stuff is the low-hanging fruit, literally, in this case. You can have this discussion with the farmers and say, what are the priorities that I need to sort out quickly that can make you more efficient so that I can then focus on having trips to China to persuade them to buy our avocados. But what can we do as the Department of Agriculture that's going to make your life easier?
Yeah.
Is it in terms of permitting? Is it in terms of logistics? Is it in terms of working with water supplies? Is it in terms of actually ensuring that you have better electricity supplies? All of these things. And it just becomes a question of saying, I've got this list which I can then allocate across to my colleagues in cabinet and get them to work on it. And now I'll focus on exports.
Yeah, he just has mismanaged the position. There's no other way to put it. And I think he was mismanaging the position without the foot and mouth disease outbreak. And unfortunately for him, because he could have mismanaged the position like every other minister mismanages their position, without a spotlight. But FMD has shed a spotlight onto his department, and specifically him, and the gross incompetence. It doesn't happen often. You have it occasionally. Water ministry some time back, there was a spotlight shed on it, and so that minister got changed over. Was it Stella Ndabeni? I think it might have been. Anyway, I forget. But occasionally there's some sort of momentum that builds behind a crisis or a disaster. And that really places the department under pressure. But usually these departments go through time. I mean, transport, look at transport. We have kids being killed on the road every week in various accidents. And adults. I think if the adults are just as important as the kids, sometimes more so. They're the breadwinners feeding multiple kids. And no one says anything about transport. We just leave it alone. We just let it happen. And really, what is the goal of a transport minister if it's not to make sure the roads are safe, right? So the thing is I think John has been unlucky that this has happened, but it's also happened because of his incompetence, his intransigence to work with certain people. He clearly became very quickly beholden to certain entities. So, big industry. He's very clearly beholden to big industry and doesn't want to talk to sort of individual farming groups, for example. And that has been his undoing. But I will also remind everyone that John has also presided over quite a catastrophic shift in terms of DA policy and the DA's willingness to stand behind their liberalism. This is a DA that under John...
And let's be clear, we're talking about classic liberalism as opposed to the idea of liberalism that currently pervades the Western world.
Yes. So, and that's what the DA has always said they are, by the way. I'm not putting words in their mouth.
Exactly, yeah.
This is what they've claimed to be. They've claimed to be the classically liberal party in this country. But under John, they've said, well, nil compensation doesn't mean zero. That's one of his ministers has said that. Under John, they've allowed the ANC to step over the inverted commas red line so many times that now the status quo seems to be let the ANC do whatever the ANC wants to do. And they're the DA that didn't really do anything about the Bella Bill. After it was shown to be really unpopular, they sort of then showed up. Funnily enough, they had to show up with a whole bunch of other people in different colored T-shirts because it wasn't their issue. They never made a thing of it. EWC, as I mentioned, the NHR, they're against it, but they're not doing anything to stop it. These are the issues that have happened under John, and now he's stepping down from the leadership race in what is clearly a deal. Okay, so what's happened is...
What do your sources tell you of what happened behind the scenes?
I don't have detail. I have broad strokes. The broad strokes are John has become deeply unpopular with the power structures in the party. The FMD was kind of the last nail in the coffin and the way he has managed it. But there were multiple things along the way which have not made him popular to certain groupings and certain people. One of the people that's been mentioned is Helen Zille. I don't think that's a secret, though. And so broadly, he's been told, look, you can either leave the nice way, we can do this the nice way, or we can do this the hard way. Clearly, the nice way has happened. So the nice way is you don't run for leadership again, you serve out your term, we will all say nice things about you, we will all praise you, we'll try to give you a soft landing, you can stay in your ministerial post until probably the end of the GNU.
Maybe Ramaphosa is going to appoint him as ambassador to Washington.
That could happen as well. There could be something else in the pipeline. I don't know. As I say, I have broad strokes. He's not going to be harmed, is the point. And that's clearly what's happened, because the hard way would have been, we're going to remove you and then make you persona non grata, and the party is going to run roughshod over your reputation.
Well, they don't really have the ability to remove him because... the DA does function under its own rules.
A democracy.
Yeah,
yes, but they have a federal council that does whatever the hell it likes, even though they claim to be a above-board organization. They aren't. They also have an election within the party which runs very similarly to the ANC. So it's an election which is almost rigged. So in other words, had he run for the leadership, all that would have happened would... he would have got very few votes and he would have lost embarrassingly. So now we have sycophancy from the DA's main account, from Leon Schreiber, from other ministers and other people saying John has been a great leader and he took the DA from a terrible place in 2019 to where it is now, and growth and all of this other nonsense. So fine. I mean, they clearly think we're idiots, that we're going to buy that. That, yeah, you're getting rid of your leader in the middle of a sort of build-up to what is 2029, actually. That you're getting rid of your leader right before a local government election. You've never done that before. You don't do these things. You do that because something is severely wrong. So people are not stupid, but the DA thinks we are, because their messaging is one of, John's been great, but he's going to call it quits now because he handled what was necessary and we don't need him anymore. But he agrees and we agree he's a great, great guy and he's going to go and we're going to appoint the next person. So that brings me to my next problem, which is, okay, we're going to appoint the next person and it's going to be Siviwe Gwarube. It's going to be Solly Malatsi. It's going to be Chris Pappas. It's going to be Jordan Hill-Lewis. It's going to be Leon Schreiber. And I can carry on going. If I said to any one of those people, if I invited them and they were brave enough, by the way, none of them are, have invited some of these people, the answer is always, we'll see or no. But if I invited them to sit in the middle of this desk for us to have an open conversation with them for a couple of hours, and I said to them, what is a woman? The chance that any of them would give us a straightforward answer
Of a biological female.
Is very unlikely, especially if we invoked some sort of transgender ideology into that conversation. They would then immediately defend the transgender position. If I said to them, tell me what the DA did wrong during COVID, I imagine you would have an answer of nothing. You know, they'd find something small, but there would be nothing broad that they would say they did wrong. If I said to them, what do you think the problems are with the World Economic Forum and the things it promotes? None of those people are going to say anything of substance about the issues with the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, the World Health Organization, and we can go on. If I said to them, you know, under our feet in South Africa, we have billions of barrels of oil and gas. And we developed some of the most advanced nuclear energy technology in the world just 15 years ago, 20 years ago. Maybe we should be looking at nuclear and oil and gas to cause economic growth, to fund our economy, to make ourselves energy rich, because really you can't do anything without energy. And maybe we should put the solar panels in the middle of farmlands and the windmills in the most beautiful areas of the country. Maybe we should put that on the back burner a little bit. Every single one of them would say no to fossil fuels and would defend renewables. And so this is the problem we have. Because what are we getting?
We're getting no potholes. That's what we get.
Are we?
Well, I think that, certainly in DA-run municipalities, by and large, there are, let's put it this way, potholes, when they do emerge in those municipalities, get fixed very promptly.
Okay, so we get no potholes.
We get no potholes.
And we get water and electricity that does work, but is very expensive because we use expensive means to produce it. And we get an economy that stays kind of stagnant, but it stays stagnant rather than completely dying. And when you drive on that road without potholes, You definitely get a speed fine when you go a little bit over the speed limit, and then you lose your license because the point system is very important because that's been written into law, and Australia does it, and we like Australia. Is that what we basically are getting?
Yeah, I mean, what's
a technocrat?
What's not to love about it, John? Come on.
Yeah. So this is my problem with the DA and it's weird. It's weird because on one hand they want to be the classically liberal party. They say they are. At the same time, if we sat down with one of those leaders and we started the conversation about classical liberalism, they would say all the right things. They would say all the right things, but they cannot bring themselves to apply that to daily existence, to where the country needs to go, to the hard decisions that need to be made.
Well, to their credit, they finally agreed to build the wall on the N2.
Tell everyone about the wall, Kanthan.
So essentially, there's the stretch between Cape Town International Airport and the Cape Town CBD, which runs along the N2 freeway. And this is a hell ride simply because of the fact that there are squatter camps, long-established squatter camps on both sides of the tracks. And these squatter camps have thugs who will weaponize rocks against motor vehicles and then use it to rob people who are passing along. And it's become a hell ride. And clearly, because Cape Town is the tourist destination that it is, you would like to have a situation where tourists coming into the country are not suddenly going to have rocks dropped onto their windshields or rocks placed on the road so that people may run across and when you have a crash and then rob your vehicle and then get out of there. So the DA has done a lot in terms of that stretch, in terms of doing things like putting up lights so that all of those areas are brightly lit. And they've, obviously needed to run electricity into those areas as well. I would assume it's free electricity because I can't imagine people there actually...
Free, paid for by the residents of Rondebosch, Constantia, Camps Bay, Sea
all
Point.
Of the above, yes.
Yes.
But
Belleville.
obviously this has not been working, and they've finally taken the decision, which I think is a good decision, to basically build a concrete wall to prevent people hopping out onto the road and doing this. Now, to put this in perspective, okay, if you happen to fly, let me pick a good city, Vienna. Mm-hmm. If you fly into Vienna and you drive from Vienna through to the CBD, you will pass through areas where there are high concrete walls on either side.
Yes. I haven't been to Vienna, but there are in several cities around the world.
Yes.
I've seen them in Los Angeles. Toronto has them. There's multiple places where they are. Usually, actually, they act as sound barriers.
Correct.
So very often, there's housing not far from a highway, often at less than 100 meters from where the highway is. People have their backyard.
Yes.
And they build these very high walls, and it insulates the sound. Of course, there's a freak out over this.
Yes, there's a freak out from the likes of Herman Mashaba, because that's what he does. And he's incapable of actually proposing a solution.
I wish we had like a South African South Park, because I think Herman Mashaba would be a great character. He'd just come on the show every time something was happening, and then he'd go, "Ree," about pretty much like anything anyone did. It's fascinating how incompetent he is almost as a human. Even his complaints have no anything to them. They just completely fall flat. I did see other people.
What I'm trying to say is that there has been an evolution on the part of Jordan Hill-Lewis, in the sense that he has gone from rainbow crosswalks to actually building the friggin' wall. And I think that that's progress of sorts. But that, do I believe for a second that he's going to change his stance in terms of all of the things you've described, such as renewables versus fossil fuels? And let's be very clear, these things are not fossil fuels. At the point at which people started talking about them as being fossil fuels.
Dinosaur juice.
Yeah, they're not dinosaur juice. can we be very clear? These things are so far beneath the surface that even across the millennia, there would not have been the possibility that you would have had sufficient biomass die out and then be able to just get miraculously converted into fuel just simply because of rotting for ages. No, that's not the way these things work. These things are so far beneath that there is no way in hell that you can say that this is dinosaur juice.
Yeah, you just also have to look at where we're getting a lot of our oil, which is deep sea.
So exactly. Now the reason why people started calling it fossil fuels, because again, it's a psyop. By calling it fossil fuels, it implies that there's limitations. Yes. It means that you're going to run out very soon because, hey,
how many fossils can there be?
Yeah,
Kanthan?
I mean, how many dinosaurs could possibly have
You've
died?
never found one in your backyard,
And not for want of digging, I must tell you.
Your dog's been busy.
Yeah. So, let's take it back to the DA now. Is there anyone in the DA that you think has the capacity to inspire confidence, just purely at a practical level?
I'm sure there are people, but I don't know who they are. What you need is two things, in my opinion. One is you need leadership. I don't think John was that person, by the way. John was a very good archetypal DA person because as a politician, he was able to get on with a lot of different people in the party. He was a bit vanilla. So well,
in fact, you and I have spoken about this on a previous pod. I've said, whatever you may say about Tony Leon, you could say Tony Leon, the leader of the opposition. I mean, he looked presidential.
Yeah.
Helen Ziller.
So Tony Leon is exactly this person. Yeah. Helen Ziller is too.
Is exactly the person too. Yes.
Number one, leadership. Okay, it's a person who, whether you like them or not, whether you agree with them or not, you respect them when they talk.
Absolutely.
And
yes.
You may even follow them even though you don't fully agree with them. That's what a leader is. Because you believe that they know something you don't. They have a vision you don't. They're going to take you a place you can't get without them. That's what a leader is. The other thing that those two people you've mentioned have is that, again, while I may not agree with them on many things, and I don't, they believe in things. And they are not afraid to believe in those things, even when some of those things are not popular things to believe in. The list of things I rattled off are all very popular things to believe in. No one will admonish you if you say, the World Economic Forum was really great this last week. It was excellent. I thought some of the ideas were wonderful. The United Nations should really exist. It helps with peace around the world. The World Health Organization is just trying to make children healthy with their vaccines. None of these things are controversial opinions. Holding them costs you nothing. Someone who is going to lead is going to have opinions that are costly. They're going to say things like, you know what? Singapore took from colonialism and they damn well built on top of it, and they have an incredible country as a result of it. Yes, controversial opinion? Absolutely. Correct? Sure.
Absolutely.
And willing to stand by it. And so I don't know who that is. I'm sure there are people like that in the DA. I'm sure there are people that could be recruited into the DA. I've often explained that the DA system doesn't allow for people like that, because the DA's process is essentially, for the most part, the only person that I can think of they've brought in who broke this mold is Ian Cameron.
Yep.
Okay, but
so I was going to say, where does Ian Cameron feature on your list?
The general mold has been, it's a young person. They find people under the age of 30 usually, and they put them through the DA Young Leaders School. Okay, now you don't just get to go to that school. If you're a little bit contrarian like me, there's almost no chance you would end up being admitted to the school. and then you get admitted to the school. So they already select for a group that thinks the same way. And as George Patton said, if everybody's thinking the same, somebody isn't thinking. So they all think the same way, and then they get trained in the DA way, and then they get integrated. And then over years of proving themselves, showing themselves to be dedicated to the party, eventually, like Ronaldo Gous, for example, they get escalated through the positions, and eventually they may end up in parliament in a ministerial post once you've, inverted commas, proven loyalty. The problem is some of those people may genuinely be great people, but unfortunately that kind of system lends itself to uniformity, which doesn't lend itself to leadership and certainly doesn't lend itself to disagreeing with the general narrative. And so where does Ian Cameron stand as someone who is willing to stand up to the general narrative, someone who definitely has leadership qualities? I don't think he has a snowball's chance in hell of getting anywhere near the leadership discussion.
That would be my take as well.
And in fact, I think Ian Cameron is one or two small little transgressions away from being thrown out of the party. I think including him was a very good PR move. There's nothing to take away from Ian Cameron, but it's to take away from the DA. I think they did it as a PR move. I think he was a clever person to include. It probably brought some people into the DA, and it didn't cost you much, especially in an election where you won big and you had a whole bunch of parliamentary seats. So, but I don't think they have the balls to bring someone in at that level who's willing to have Herman Mashaba, and in fact, you can include the whole team of News 24 and the Daily Maverick, who's willing to have those groups of people going and bawling their eyes out about every second word that person says every single day. And so I am genuinely concerned. And people might be critical because they'll say, well, you sat and criticized the DA for half an hour and you've got nothing nice to say about them. Yeah, but they're the second biggest party in the country. And the chances are they're going to grow a little bit in the next election. I don't think massive. I don't think huge. Do you think they're going to grow, or you think they're going to shrink or stagnant?
If you look in terms of the numbers based on the last election, percentage-wise, they emerged more strongly, but in actual numbers, did they grow? No. Everyone else went backwards. They held steady. So
I would give them the benefit of the doubt that they are probably going to grow a little bit. I do think they'll eat away at a bit of the ANC's middle class vote.
When you say grow, do you believe that more people will go to the polls? So again, let me just separate out the two different categories.
Yeah.
I think that you're going to have lots of people going to the polls to vote for Helen in the municipal elections in Johannesburg.
I agree.
And but that's because it's very much about the fact that Helen has a particular trust factor that people have in her that's not necessarily that they have in the party, which is probably not dissimilar to the situation between Trump and the Republican Party in the U.S. But if you look across the board to the 2029 elections, is there right now enough of an impetus for the 11 million people who didn't vote in the last election to actually get up on election day and go and put a mark on that ballot paper? I'm not seeing anything at this stage. People are going to go out there and vote for something, not against something.
Yes, which is why, Ian Cameron, as an example, to appoint him as your leader may not be the worst idea, because he's basically another version of General Mkhwanazi, right? He's a law and order guy. So if the only thing you sell in the 29 election is law and order and almost nothing else, you may actually get some of those 11 million to come and put their mark on a ballot. Sure, I think they'll get some. I don't know if the numbers of people voting will grow. I think overall you may see a drop off, certainly because the youth are probably going to be more and more disengaged. So the youth who would have voted for the EFF 10 years ago are not youth anymore. in the sense that they're not involved in college campuses, university campuses. They're not youngsters anymore. They're trying to deal with life on an everyday basis, and maybe the little bit more of reality has sunk in, and so there's probably not as much excitement for that party. I don't see that party really attracting the youth that are coming up that much anymore, and I don't see any other party doing it.
Well, the problem that the EFF has is that they don't have a new generation of Julius Malemas who have been given a platform, because Julius cannot afford to let anyone get into the limelight.
Supersede him,
Yeah.
So will the numbers change? I don't know. But in percentage terms is all I'm talking about. Because unfortunately, as much as I would love lots of more people to vote, I think the realities are it doesn't matter if only 5 million people were to vote, the election would still stand. And, would be governed by 5 million people or their decision. And so I think the DA has the potential to grow a little bit, and the ANC is likely to shrink a little bit. And those will probably coincide with each other. However, what are they really aiming at? What are they trying to? Is it to slowly grow and kind of half govern next time, as we've discussed on the podcast before? Slowly increase the number of ministries you control and hope that you can imbue your competence, because that's what really they offer at this time. To me, they don't offer policy position. The GNU is run on ANC policy. Everything that gets done currently is ANC policy. The single thing that you could say is not ANC policy is what's happened at the Treasury, where the Treasury has said, look, we're not going to be overspending the budget anymore. We're not running in a deficit. And I think that we've given him credit before. I think Ashwin Sarapen has been responsible in large part for that. And I think that that's been good DA policy.
But we also need to be clear that the reason why that has emerged is because if they were not implementing that in the budget, then the DA would not be voting for that budget.
Yes. So it's the only place where they've exercised their power.
Yes.
But in everything else, we have an ANC policy. Our energy policy remains ANC energy policy. Our transport policy remains ANC energy policy. Our justice system and policing remains ANC policy. Nothing else has changed. Even in the departments that are run by the DA, what they've done is they've gone, okay, we'll continue with the ANC policy, but we will just do it more competently. So we're going to run Department of Public Works, and we're just going to make sure that we have better control of our assets, and that where they run down, we're going to actually improve on them, or whatever it happens to be. So we're going to do the actual job better than the ANC did the job. That's the DA's offering. And I really am just, all of this, I think, comes to me saying that I have huge disappointment that the second largest party, and what could become the largest party in the country, at least for now, with nothing else on the radar, the fact that that party has an offering of competence and not an offering of actual policy. This is how we're going to change the country. This is how we're going to make things better, not by the waiting times at Home Affairs being shorter. No. By making the economic growth 10%. And this is how we're going to do it, which will reduce unemployment by this amount. By making energy half the price it is today. By making sure that entrepreneurs can enter that economy with absolute ease. By making sure that we stop fighting with our trade partners like the United States and ensuring that we can have great relationships. Nothing the DA is doing is pointing to that. And so I guess we'll see who they get. Do you want to pin your flag to the mast at this point in terms of who you think is going to be there?
No, I certainly do not. I think, we still have a lot of time between now and 2029. The critical thing for me in terms of what is happening in Parliament right now is the fact that the ANC has been losing a bucket load of money based on the fact that they've had an overall reduction in the number of parliamentarians. So most people are not aware of the fact that, yes, you pay a salary to each parliamentarian, which, is more than R1 million a year. But correspondingly, for each parliamentarian, there's also what's known as a constituency allowance, which is roughly about as much as the person's salary, which gets paid to the political party.
Yeah.
So if you consider that the ANC, let's say across, and the amount of money, by the way, national parliament is between 1.2 to 1.5 million per year per parliamentarian. And in the provinces, it's something like 800,000 to 1.2 million a year per provincial parliamentarian. So, just as a ballpark figure, if you take a view that the ANC lost 100 members of parliament across the board, both national, that, you're immediately looking at 100 times 1.5 million.
Yeah.
That is a bucket load of money, and it's one of the reasons why they're not in a position to pay their salaries, because that's how they used to pay their salaries, and that money is just simply not there anymore. So, consider there's 100 million rand that has now vanished from your budgets, and that's money that's not going to come back. So what is going to happen within the ANC structures as a result of the fact that they're not going to be able to lay claim to that money? Well, I think that there's going to be a lot of dissatisfaction. There's going to be a lot of people who are going to be basically tearing the ANC apart from the inside, because they're no longer able to feed to the same extent that they used to in the past. Is there likely to be far more fragmenting that's happening? Yes. Does that mean, though, that the DA is going to end up in a position to dictate what happens at a national level? I don't think so, because I think what's far more likely to happen is that you're going to have more of the likes of MK and EFF rip-offs also getting into Parliament. And between them, are they likely to come up with enough of a percentage of the parliamentary votes to be able to take office? I think at this point there's a very strong possibility that could happen. And if you consider right now an ANC that currently is trapped into a coalition with the DA simply because Ramaphosa said so, and no doubt because money was put on the table. And if that money is no longer on the table, well, is the ANC, in the absence of Ramaphosa bringing money to the table, more likely to want to get into a partnership with MK and the EFF? I think that that's a far more likely scenario.
Well, I have said that I do not believe the GNU lasts up until the next election. I think that the nature of elections means that the DA, who has basically let the ANC do as they please, will need about a year to change the PR messaging. They will need about a year to convince the population that they are not the ANC, that they are against the ANC. And that's just a psychological thing.
So here's the absurdity of it. Okay, we could well have had a situation where, let's take the case of the Bella Bill. Okay, you could have had Garube turning around and saying, it is not our policy to implement the Bella Bill. However, the Bella Bill was signed into law before we took power, and now we have no choice but to implement it within the constraints that we have. However, we are going to do our damnedest to ensure that the way in which this bill gets implemented is in line with the DA's view for the country, which is, and you rattle off a slew of things. Ditto in the case of agriculture. So at every step of the way, you're making it very clear that you're doing this stuff under duress. And the reason why you are doing it under duress is because you would rather have a DA person doing it under duress than to hand it over to an MK person.
But they haven't done any of this.
But they haven't. And the question is, why? Because, you see, if they did do that, there would have consistent messaging all the way through, there is no way that Ramaphosa would have rocked the boat, because he does not want a situation where Jacob Zuma is going to be calling the shots in terms of what happens in government. So the DA, under Steenhuisen, had every opportunity to take the moral high ground while implementing these laws. But they didn't.
They didn't. Okay. And so what I think is going to happen...
And so to your point, a year before the elections, if they suddenly turn around and try to bring in that messaging at that point, no one's going to buy it.
Yes, but here's what I think will happen. They won't bring the messaging in from within government. They will leave. They'll create some issue, and then they will... So when you see some big thing start happening in the latter part of 28, mid to latter part of 28, between the DA and an ANC, some sort of disagreement. An easy thing will be something like an international relations issue. That will escalate into a bigger thing, which it doesn't need to be, but it will escalate. The DA will then pull out of the GNU on principle, and then they will... This is all marketing, right? It's behavioral psychology. So even if you believe at that point the DA has let us down, they went into government with the ANC and then did all ANC things, they will be able to convince you in a year of being the opposition again that, in fact, they're the good guys. Okay, so that's what I think is happening. I think we will get our doomsday coalition, by the way. I hate the terminology.
The question is, how do they do that and then promptly, immediately after the elections, go back into partnership?
Because this is politics, Kanthan, and because most people are making... Voting is about as thoughtful a decision for most people as deciding whether or not you want McDonald's or KFC for lunch. Then you've done it, and then you move on. And then your critique of what happens and the government is almost devoid from your responsibility of having put these people in that position, or not put those people in that position in the case of people who decide just not to show up at the polls, which is not on some moral position, principled stance. They're just doing it because they're too bloody lazy to go and vote, or inverted commas disillusioned. So, we're going to get our MK, EFF, ANC government. I am pretty in belief of that, at least. I wouldn't say I'm certain, because who can be certain of these things? But I think the DA will leave that government, give themselves some runway, somewhere between 8 to 12 months, to make their argument as the opposition. We'll get the MK, EFF, ANC as a government for a period of less than a year. It won't really mean anything. It'll just mean they come into those positions and loot a little bit while they can before the election. And then we will have an election again, and we'll see what happens. And that is, in my opinion, the strategy. I know there are DA people, internal DA people, who've told me, I don't know what I'm talking about. That's never going to happen. And I don't believe them. I don't believe them for 1 second, because that's a smart move. Frankly, that's a smart move. If you want to go into the 2029 election as the people in government, with growth of maybe 0.5% a year, with unemployment still at north of 30%, with the economy still stagnant as hell, with nothing on the ground having changed, with burgeoning squatter camps and illegal settlements developing everywhere, with increasing or at least the same level of crime we currently have, and you want to go into that election sitting next to the ANC that you've played second fiddle to for 5 years, you are out of your frickin' minds. At least try and lie and fake it before that. That's the smart move. It's just the smart move. It's how you run that PR game. But it remains to be seen what happens.
What do you think the chances are of the other parties on the sidelines actually increasing their support? So, top of the list, of course, Freedom Front Plus, from my perspective, because I think Groenewald is certainly one of the more popular figures within the GNU.
Yeah, I think here's the problem. The Freedom Front Plus will grow. I have little doubt in that, because I think that what the DA gains in the ANC middle class black vote, which is not going to be huge, but a couple of 100,000, maybe 500,000 votes, the DA is probably going to lose in white voters. I think that there are many white voters who don't appreciate, and it's got nothing to do with their race, it's just got to do with their essential values and beliefs, who are, whether they know it or not, classical liberals, and just don't enjoy the things that the DA has done. And so I think a lot of those people will probably move towards the Freedom Front Plus. The Freedom Front Plus in some ways have played a good game, so far at least, because they've been very moderate and quiet and go along to get along, but without doing anything that seems to overstep boundaries in terms of where their principles are. So I do think the Freedom Front Plus will have growth. Unfortunately, I just don't think it will have the growth it could have. And this is because of the bad things that party does, which we've discussed ad nauseum, I feel like, so far on this show. Of the bad things it does, that is essentially their PR game is atrocious, absolutely terrible. You know, there's a almost organic campaign to have the Freedom Front Plus, Groenewald or Mulder, as elected as president. It's coming from the black community, and based on the competence that they've seen in that ministry, in the correctional services. And, you have to be able to capitalize on that. It's viral. It's in the social media space, and you've got to be able to capitalize on it. And they can't. They don't know how to, because they're old Afrikaans men who probably don't know how most of the features on their iPhones work. And
it's still pretty much a family business.
And that's exactly. And so they're not willing to hire the youngsters and the dynamic people who may not be their supporters, I might add.
Well, they have taken Ronaldo Gous, so there's that.
Yes, they have taken him, and he will be valuable to them, no doubt. But he's one man, and he's gone in as a councillor, essentially. He's going back for his councillor position. And he'll be Ronaldo as Ronaldo is online and on YouTube and all the rest, and that's great. But you need to have someone in the back end of that party controlling this type of strategy. I said a while back, they need to change from being the Vryhond, I'm going to get it wrong, but the VF Plus. They need to change from being VF Plus. They can be that, but they also need to grow the FF Plus brand, the Freedom Front Plus brand. And so they need to understand as a party that in many ways they appeal to the Afrikaans community, but they could also very easily appeal to the white English community, the Jewish community, and a number of other communities who may not otherwise be thinking about them because they're stuck in this sort of very stodgy kind of positioning.
Well, you see, I would assume that policy planning meetings within the Freedom Front Plus take place exclusively in Afrikaans, most by and large. And I think it'll be a significant mental shift on their part, because if they want to draw in all of those voter communities that you've been speaking of, I think that that's probably going to be one of the obstacles to their being able to get that type of dynamic leadership into their party structures.
Yeah, look, I think, you want to be die Vryheidsfront, that's fine. I have no problem with that. I've lots of respect for the Afrikaans community. I think as a party, they've done good things. It's a game, right? This whole thing's a game. It has major consequences, but at the end of the day, it's a game. It's to some extent, it's a popularity contest. People have to identify with the brand. That's a big thing in this country with voting. It's a lot about the brand. We were MAGA long before MAGA. The ANC understands that. People mock them about those leather jackets with the patchwork and branding their cars and the T-shirts. but it's a brand. People identified with the brand. The way they did their posters, they haven't changed the way they did their posters since Nelson Mandela. They still do the exact same poster. They just put whoever the leader is for that particular election on the poster. It's you've got to understand the game you're playing, and you've got to understand that to different people, they will look for different things in terms of why they're attracted to you as a product. And the DA understands this a little bit better. They did their whole rebranding with Obama's logo, and they're very good at putting out a press release, and they're very good at the graphics. But that's getting a bit old now because graphics are very 2010 and memes are very 2020. And the DA can't do memes. So, they're falling a bit behind the times.
Well, they get out-memed because, just simply if you look in terms of this TNAs and memes, it's very difficult to come up with a credible response to this TNAs and memes, especially around his physical attributes, shall we say. But let's just take a look at the other people that have the potential to make a difference. So, IFP. Now, this is an interesting one because one would have thought that a logical thing for the IFP to have done would have been to go into partnership with MK in KZN and be able to actually make a significant difference out there. Clearly, let's be very clear that if we had a scenario where Shenge was still alive, I think that that's very much what would have happened. So if we go back to the Mandela era where you had an IFP ANC coalition running KZN, the province was actually incredibly well run. Durban consistently won the award for being the best run city in Africa. And, so there's a number of things that were happening at the time based on that particular coalition. Now, clearly that changed. I don't think that the being in partnership with the DA and with the GNU has actually worked in favor of the IFP, which, leads me to believe that they would be likely to jump ship if, come the next round of elections, and to partner with the ANC rather. But what's your take on that particular brand? Do you think it's going to last in the absence of Mangosuthu Buthelezi?
I don't see how. We kind of got this fascinating thing. So the DA is this established brand that is trying to find their leader to be the person people vote for. The ANC has an established brand that whoever they put into that position will be the person that their supporters will vote for. The IFP lost their person. So they had their Jacob Zuma, they had their Julius Malema, right? And now he's gone. And that's partly his own fault because there wasn't proper succession planning. And maybe there couldn't have been because it was decades, right? And so how do you transition that, whether you're alive or dead? It's really difficult to do that. And it would have taken years, and you need a lot of spotlight and you need a lot of things to happen. When Mario Ambrosini was around and he was doing big things in Parliament and making big speeches and getting lots of headlines, you kind of feel like someone like him could have theoretically taken over that party. Now, I know he died long before Mangosuthu Buthelezi, but he, that you need that kind of momentum. I just don't see how they get the momentum, and I feel like the Zulu Nationalist Party is now MK. It's not IFP anymore.
Exactly. Yes.
And so, if that's the Zulu Nationalist Party, what does IFP have? Now, if you've ever read the IFP's policy documents, they're actually a pretty solid party.
Yes.
They have pretty good stuff. Some of their stuff is actually, from a classically liberal perspective, is actually better than the DA's.
I think most of it, yes.
But unfortunately, they've never really been in a position to implement it. And even more unfortunate is that a lot of their members clearly don't understand their policy at all, or where it comes from, or what underpins it. And so you'll often have quite embarrassingly, I think, IFP people speaking like they're members of the ANC while not realizing that their own policy is completely opposite to what they're saying. And, IFP is very pro the private sector, as an example. Very. It's certainly in their policy documents. But then often when they vote in Parliament, they'll vote against the private sector. So, or they'll say things against it, or they'll be involved in the Competition Commission and say silly things, or that kind of stuff. So I sadly don't see a path for them to anything great. I don't think they disappear. I think they have a brand. I think they have followers who, are going to follow their football club. Whether they're top of the table or relegated, they're going to follow them forever. So I don't think they disappear, but I think they remain a small party.
ACDP?
Yeah, the ACDP, again, a sad case because arguably should be the biggest party in this country.
Yes.
The ACDP are a Christian conservative party. From a fundamental personal belief perspective, the majority of the people in this country align with the ACDP.
Yes.
Death penalty, abortion, Christianity, and law and order, all of these things. The way they approach COVID, funnily enough, the best party in COVID was the ACDP. And we have big churches in this country that theoretically should be telling their members to vote for the ACDP. Now, bearing in mind the numbers you're talking about, you don't need that many people to vote for you to get into power. We're talking like, 6 million votes? Somewhere about there makes you the leading party in the country.
Yep.
There are 6 million Christians at least that attend church regularly and consider themselves to be relatively devout Christians. And I don't understand, I think a bit of a family business story again happening there with Kenneth. It's just been his own sort of thing that he's done for forever. And they just don't seem to be able to access those people. And I will give them a bit of a ding as well, as much as I will give them kudos for the COVID period. When the EWC bill was signed, they did not stand against it. They kind of pulled we have to revisit the past and we have to right the wrongs and wah. And they weren't willing to say that we shouldn't have an act like this. We shouldn't be taking away people's property, private property, from them. The government certainly should not be taking people's private property. So, again, a party that will probably stay there or thereabouts. I think they probably got a bump last time because a fair number of people noticed them in COVID. Remember, because these numbers are not so big, you get a bump of 100,000 voters. Sounds small. 3 seats in Parliament. So that's probably where they will stay. I would guess if they don't do something special, they're actually going to drop a little bit in the next elections. And then, the wild card is MK-EFF because both of those are cults of personality. Jacob Zuma dies. I mean, he's not a young man. He has had some sort of health issues before, as would be expected in a 70-odd-year-old man.
No, he's 80-something now.
Is he into his 80s?
Yeah, he is into his 80s.
So how long is he going to live for? Are people really voting for his son or his daughter? I find that difficult to believe, certainly in those numbers. And Julius, obviously, he would assumptively have many, many years ahead of him, although he doesn't look like the healthiest guy, but he would assumptively have many years ahead of him. But again, it's all him. So if anything happens to either of those people, or for some reason they become a bit of a turn-off. Now, I think that's going to happen to Julius.
You think he's going to jail?
That's an interesting one. We haven't discussed it. you're asking me all the questions. I feel like I'm talking way too much here.
Yes. I think let's give our 14 viewers something more to complain about.
I think we're up to 15. Kevin. I think we can be honest. We're up to 15. Those parties are wild cards because you never know what happens with those people. And I think Julius is becoming a turn-off only because, as I said, the people who supported him are becoming older. And so what does he promise those people? What is he giving those people? That exuberant youth, that exciting stadium, that's not going to be exciting for a 35, 40-year-old, 45-year-old, 50-year-old anymore. As these people age, have their own kids, look at the schooling and go, wow, this is freaking terrible. Nothing the EFF promises is going to fix this, right? Do I think he's going to jail? I don't know. I think I've seen two interesting theories. I think we both like this. We like to come to our conclusions not based on feeling or guess, but based on some sort of evidence or data. And so I've seen two interesting arguments. One argument is no, he's not going to jail because the judge is not willing to put themselves into that position, essentially, of having been the judge that sent him off, and is also considering the impact on the country, where there will be riots or things like that.
So let me give you my take on this thing.
Yeah.
Jacob Zuma was given a 15-month sentence by the Constitutional Court.
For contempt.
Why was he given a 15-month sentence? Because a 15-month sentence makes you ineligible to run for parliament. So the interesting thing for me is, can we see a scenario where a court sentences Julius Malema to 15 months? I think yes. Is it possible that they will sentence him to 15 months and then suspend the sentence, but it still counts to prevent him from taking his seat in parliament? You see, that's going to be the interesting one for me. They don't actually have to send him to jail in order to emasculate him.
Yeah. Maybe let me finish the second point, which I thought was more interesting, and is the way I'm leaning, is that he's going to be found guilty.
Well, he has been found guilty.
Yes. He's not. He has been found guilty. He's going to be sent to jail. That will be the sentence will be, in fact, a jail term, not suspended. In fact, if you look at the law and the sentencing, it shouldn't be able to be a suspended sentence. Correct. For the crime he committed, because it is a very serious crime. So I think I'm leaning towards he goes to jail. The sentence says that he is imprisoned for a period of time. And that is why we've had these extensively long discussions of, where the verdict took almost 4 days, right?
Well, the verdict basically covered up every potential loophole under which he could appeal.
Right. So this is what I think is going to happen, is I think he's going to be sentenced to jail, not suspended, but he's then going to immediately appeal. And the judge knows that those arguments are then going to go to the Supreme Court. And so that's why everything's been laid out as it has. Yes. And remember, the maximum sentence, I think, if I'm not mistaken, is 15 years. And if you appeal a sentence, and let's say you get given 12 months, if you appeal, usually appeal judges don't appreciate an appeal where you should have taken your medicine and shut up. And so there's this general thing that happens in the Supreme Court of Appeal, that if they find that the lower court was correct and you were wrong on the face of it to make the appeal, they often make the punishment worse.
They treat it as frivolous litigation.
Correct. Yes. And they make things worse for you. And so I think the chances are he then goes to Supreme Court of Appeal, because just like Jacob Zuma, he wants his day in court, Kanthan. Supreme Court of Appeal will then take several years. They too will find him guilty and will sentence him to equal or longer.
You see, the question for me is whether in that interim period he's able to take up his seat in Parliament. And my reading of the rules is no, he's not.
So that'll be interesting. You're discussing a completely separate thing.
So I'm saying that at a practical level, if Julius Malema is not able to take his seat in Parliament, that'll have a huge impact upon the future of the EFF.
Mm-hmm.
Because he can campaign on the part of the party, but like Jacob Zuma, he's not able to take a seat in Parliament.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it will be fascinating.
A current scenario, remember, that had Jacob Zuma not been given that sentence by the Constitutional Court, and it's unprecedented.
Yeah.
No one else has ever received a sentence directly from the Constitutional Court. The Constitutional Court has ruled on whether or not sentences were appropriate because that's its job.
Yes.
But actually issuing a sentence
is not what they do.
Is not what they do.
But remember, it wasn't for
it doesn't matter what it's for.
Brought to them.
It doesn't matter what it's for.
Yeah.
You remember the context at the time. I said that what should have happened is the Constitutional Court should have sent it right back to the Zondo Commission and said, no, it's your job to hold him in contempt and send the police out to arrest him.
Yeah.
That is what should have happened. And then there would have been a process by which he would have faced trial for contempt. It's not for the apex court to completely short-circuit that entire process and impose a sentence. So it is very clear to me that the purpose of that was to remove Jacob Zuma from the political playing field. I don't think they expected him to come back.
Form a party and then get 13% of the vote.
Yeah, and if they had not issued that sentence, he would be sitting in Parliament as leader of the opposition.
Yes, he would be. Yeah, I think Julius takes it all the way to the Constitutional Court. I'm not sure it matters whether he's allowed to sit in Parliament or not, because of a few things. If Jacob Zuma was in Parliament and the leader of MK as the opposition, who cares? We have far too little focus, far too much focus on what our ministers are doing and who they are, and far too little focus on Parliament and what goes on in Parliament. It's a global problem. The Americans have the same thing. Far too much focus on the executive, far too little focus on the legislature. Same thing happens in France. Far too much focus on the presidency there. The reality is all the stuff we've discussed about these ministers, what they do, be they DA or ANC, you could change that, I wouldn't say overnight, but in a parliamentary calendar year. You could change all of it by just rescinding certain acts, just updating certain acts, just passing new laws. This isn't difficult to do. It's just it never happens. What is our parliament doing? Okay, now they're in break. They're in I forget the term, but they're not meeting at the moment. But what did they do last year? Could the average South African tell you what the South African Parliament did last year, what they passed, what they debated, what they rejected, whether they did rescind any acts? No. Nobody could tell you. But people can tell you what's going on in random ministries. Why? The things that matter are the laws. If you want to open a business, the things preventing you from opening that business are not the Minister of Trade and Industry. Okay? They are the laws which are put into place and enforced by the Ministry of Trade and Industry. Now, without those laws, you don't have those barriers. But the reality is that nobody cares. If Jacob Zuma is in Parliament and having debates with the other parliamentary whips and leaders, nobody cares.
But this is actually a good thing right now, because what it means is come 2029, we're going to have a scenario where no one is going to be able to propose new law.
Well, it's been the answer to the question of what happened last year is basically squat.
Yes.
Okay. And the reason squat happened
because no one can propose
is because they propose laws. The ANC proposes something and the DA goes, we're not voting with you on that.
So as long as...
Which is actually the DA's success. It's the only success in the GNU is not in the GNU. And if you want to know the biggest mistake John Steenhuisen ever made, it was going into the ministry, into the government, instead of remaining as the parliamentary leader. Because the DA has always had this rule. They love to say that they separate party and state. Okay? So I complained to Helen Ziller during COVID that Alan Winde was being an authoritarian prick. And I got told there is nothing the DA can do to rein in Alan Winde because, or Alan Wind, I don't know. There's nothing they can do to rein him in because the DA does not interfere in state control and actions. So in other words, they send their person, and once their person is there, unless they do something majorly transgressive, their person is their person. Okay.
Unless you're Ronaldo Jose and you get, hauled out on the basis of
bullshit.
A comment taken out of context from a
13
YouTube.
years earlier,
Yes.
or whatever it was. Now, what John did was he broke that rule, right? Because he is both in the state and head of the party. And that has caused him to have to choose between violating the principles of the party or violating the principles of the state. He chose to violate the principles of the party. Now, had he been the parliamentary leader and not the minister, he could have said, we don't agree with what the GNU is doing. Someone could have said, but you guys are in the GNU. And he could have said, yes, we are, but we separate party and state, as we always have done. Unfortunately for John is he knew his time was ticking and he had to make the best of what he could, because where's he going after this, right? John's not being invited into any boardrooms. No one's waiting to open a large business with John. There's no mine somewhere waiting for John to come develop it. Okay? So John knew, listen, I'm leader for a very short period of time here. I'm going to make hay while the sun shines. And the salary in the ministerial position is roughly double, 70 to 80%, I think, greater than the salary I'm going to get in Parliament. So I'm going to make hay while the sun shines. And that's what happened. If the DA is smart, their next leader will not go in to any kind of GNU. They will have control, perhaps. They will have something centralized with their ministers that are in it. But unless they are the president or the deputy president, they will not go into that GNU because it poisons the party and doesn't allow them to separate from that poison.
So, final thing. Who do you think's the next president?
I don't think we know yet because
You don't think it's Motsepe?
I do think it's Motsepe.
I think it's Motsepe as well.
So I do think it's
and
Motsepe.
the strongest thing that in favor of it being Motsepe is the fact that he's denying it as fervently as he is.
It just seems that, I mentioned that I feel like everything's kind of rigged for 29. To a point. I obviously can't rig anything. I'm not big into like conspiratorial conspiracies involving complex systems because that's not possible. But I think the consensus is that the ANC will remain big. The DA will remain big. Both will be big enough together to form some sort of coalition. That coalition is acceptable to both people inside the country and people outside the country. Some of those people outside the country are very important. They're the likes of the IMF, the EU, China, even the USA in some respects. And so the reality is that they have to create a scenario in which that can exist. And it's very clear that Cyril has created a situation in which he has been a beneficiary of government outside of government for at least 15 years now. So while being involved in the government, he's made sure that his entire family and everyone connected to it is engaged in benefiting from his position and the people he knows in the government, but inwardly to the private sector. Motsepe is the head of that operation. And they just cannot allow someone like Mashatile to take over. Because
Correct.
Mashatile wants to have the same setup but for himself, which would exclude Cyril's entire network. And so, yeah, I think Motsepe is probably likely to be the next person as the head of the ANC, bearing in mind the ANC vote is a bought proposition.
Yes.
So, the delegates basically get bought. Doesn't cost that much. If you wanted to be head of the ANC and we had somewhere between 150 and 200 million rand, we could probably make you the head of the ANC. And so, yeah, I think it's likely to put Motsepe. But you agree with that?
I agree with the fact that Ramaphosa can't have a situation where Mashatile comes to power, because then Ramaphosa will be subject to interrogation around Phala. Yeah. And essentially the DA has said to him, and I don't have inside information on this, I'm speculating, but the DA has said that if we're working together, we will not go after you.
Yeah, I think that's probably likely, although they may not have needed to say that to him, given that they don't actually have the power to do that. And yeah, I mean, we will see. We'll see how much of this pans out. I think a lot of predictions in this particular show, which always opens us up to massive criticism several years from now. But at least that's how the lay of the land looks. And we'll have to see. Good luck, John, I guess, is the last thing that needs to be said. What does he have? About 8 months or so, maybe a little bit less, left of being the head of the DA.
Well,
let's hope he doesn't get sanctioned by the United States in that time.
Well, he's still going to have his day in court, and his day in court is going to come around the Labour Court matter that Roman Kavanagh has brought against them.
He won't have that day. That day is going to be had by whoever the DA chooses to represent, because the litigation is, as far as I understand, against the DA.
Yes.
So, the DA is going to have to send whoever they send. Look, the DA is going to lose. That's what's going to happen there. And in fact, I don't think it's going to end up in court. I think they're ultimately going to come to a settlement. They should have done this long ago. And I think that's what will likely happen. A settlement will be reached. And that'll all be buried under an NDA, and we'll never be able to talk about any of it again. Certainly not the parts we know about that involve that. But yeah, I think John's done. I think he's made his hay, and I do hope. I don't think he's inherently a bad human being. I think he failed as the Minister of Agriculture, has failed, will continue to fail. I think he will probably stay in that position and continue to screw it up. I think Sarkelich is going to destroy him in court soon. So that's going to happen. And, I kind of wish him all the best that he can have in his future. But I would like to see him out of the political space sooner rather than later.
You don't think he's got a career as a backbencher?
No.
Okay.
I think he's done. I think he's cooked his goose, but you may be correct. Based on how the DA's messaging this, they're making as if he's a hero of some sort, and now he's stepping down. It's like Biden and Kamala, right? It's Joe was the hero we needed when we needed him, but now he's going away, and we've got someone else. Even though he should be staying, it's kind of weird, and we're letting him go at a strange time. But look at this new person. I think that'll basically be what happens, and John will go out to pasture, and you'll probably find him running a print shop or something, or being an estate agent 5 years from now. Okay, so should we call it?
Great. Yeah, let's call it.
Right. As always, thank you for watching or listening. We would like you to click the like button and subscribe. We want to go from 15 viewers to like 20. That'd be a nice increase. And as always, we do thank those of you who do listen to the show, do watch the show. We will catch you next time. Cheers.